Sup fam, it's Spacepan with long overdue video. I was sick for a while, but I wanted to address a lot of what's been going on in the wake of the whole Kavanaugh circus. And circus is, of course, the my chosen terminology. Many people's preferred terminology for what happened with Dr. Ford. More about that in a minute. But I want to talk a little bit about that issue and also bring back an older concept I had introduced, I guess, earlier this year in some of my older videos, which is the idea of a radical MRA. Now, the reason I think that this concept is so useful and so important has to do with the fact that anti-feminism has become mainstream. Back when I was a slush pile editor for AVFM, I did it really briefly and really minimally. Eventually I had to stop because I wasn't as committed as I should be, that if they were relying on me to do something, that it just wasn't really practical. I had shitty internet and it made just everything like way 10 times harder than it needed to be. Anyway, there was an article that we had approved that was published on another website, and I guess she had sent it to us to have it published at AVFM, and it had to do with the men's rights movement as feminism's nascent fourth wave and mainstream anti-feminism. And I think that article actually correctly called that 2014, 2015 was sort of when anti-feminism was becoming more and more mainstream. And we saw it predominantly just in the fact that feminism was becoming so ridiculously unpopular. It's really, really retreated to the last bastions of the ivory tower. And I think a lot of feminists really correctly do feel that they're under siege. And they should be. They should be under siege, and they should feel that way. That you picked that ideology. You picked that. Patriarchy theory is the single most dehumanizing narrative that's ever been proposed. You've dehumanized half of all human beings who've ever existed, which is like 50 billion or some shit. If you assume like 100 billion people have ever existed, that's what possibly could dehumanize more people than that when you look through all of history and then you impute malice upon every single decision made by virtually all men in regards to half of the other humans, right? Where they say that there never could be a good motive or a good intention behind any of the things that men do for women. It's always about patriarchy and domination and control, and that this becomes the nature of masculinity. Like, it's a really fucked up narrative, and it's really fucked up that people just kind of buy into it as a default. And I think that the fact that it's so popular and that it's so easy for people to digest is one of the easiest ways to prove the gynocentrism theory, because it explains both traditionalism as well as the prevalence of feminism and the one-sidedness of, the women's movement as the entirety of the gender rights narrative and conversation. So with the distinction between radical MRA and MRA, the reason I think it's so important is that since we have this mainstream anti-feminism going on, it's necessarily a big tent issue. It's a big tent movement now. And we're seeing more and more so that there's coffeeshop anti-feminists. And what it has to do with is this whole demonizing of SJWs and feminism, where basically people's views in regard to the subject is all in on the demonization of the absolute most ridiculous feminists they can find. And because of this, they don't actually care about fixing things and actually bringing forth a conversation about gender where both women's and men's issues can be addressed. Instead, they just care about shitting on feminism. And then what happens is, of course, these just coffee shop anti-feminists get labeled as MRAs. And while I do understand that within the manosphere we already have a million distinctions when it comes to like PUA, MGTOW, masculinists, MRAs, all that shit. I get it that we have all these distinctions, and then people who criticize people within the manosphere fail to actually use those distinctions. Like one of the best examples of that was actually in that BuzzFeed series on Netflix, which I did a response to, the MRA episode, where she goes through and they actually make these distinctions. They distinguish between the alt-right, between MGTOW, between PUA, between incels, between the MRA. They make all the distinctions, right? But then throughout the entire presentation, all she's doing is just sloppily conflating all of them, which means that they have the intellectual capacity to make the distinction. They just don't have the integrity to actually see it through. So putting that aside, the main reason I think that we need a separate category for radical MRA is to combat these coffee shop anti-feminist retards who say shit like, oh, people within the manosphere, people within the MRM are just a mirror to feminism. It's such a fucking stupid and disingenuous narrative. And the only way you can think that's possible is if you don't understand gynocentrism, if you don't understand the history of the women's movement, and if you don't understand how serious men's issues are, how many men's issues there are, and how terrible it is that they've been ignored for as long as they have. Because typically what happens is people will see just one or two issues among all of the men's issues, and then they kind of have a couple of pet issues. But unless you're digging deeper, and unless you're looking at the actual entire scope of the conversation, you don't see and you don't perceive how fucked up it all is. And so many of these coffee shop anti-feminists, because they come into the conversation from a perspective of just, oh, look at those particular crazy feminists over there, they don't perceive the depth of how fucked up feminism is. They don't look deeper and realize that these are common threads throughout the entire women's movement. It was never about equality. All of the waves were garbage. The suffragettes were a bunch of terrorists and just like racist bitches and fucking female supremacists. Look at the fact that men don't have the same right to suffrage that women do. What's the excuse for that? What's the excuse for that, right? They say they're all about equality. That one's just been left hanging there. It's been like over a fucking century by now. We're talking about the United States. And like this is countless, right? Look at the whole abortion conversation, how legal paternal surrender is never offered, aka paper abortion, is never offered as a reciprocal right for men in that situation, because fuck men, right? You consent to sex, therefore you consent to the financial obligations of parenthood. So all these hypocrisies are just hanging out there, and you can pluck them out of every single wave of feminism if you bother to look that far, right? And really all you have to do is just list the women's issues and then list the men's issues and compare them. And what you realize is that among these men's issues, not only are they more severe and more like numerous and the ones that like really fucking need to get addressed, but a lot of them go way the fuck back, right? Like a lot of people aren't even aware of bachelor laws and shit like that. So the fact is that there's always been a need to address both men's and women's issues, but then women's issues had just had like a 100-year head start for no reason. I mean, for reasons, the reason is gynocentrism, which is the same reason we had traditionalism, particularly in Western civilizations based on chivalry. So once you see that entire perspective, there's a whole series of conclusions that come along with it, which is that the women's movement was a female supremacist movement, not a gender equality movement. The people who identified as women's rights activists and focused on women's issues on the grounds of equality of the sexes were a bunch of negligent bitches. Every single one of them. There's zero exceptions. And frankly, I'm at the point where I don't even want to give Camille Paglia and Christina Hoff Sommers a pass. Like, fuck them for still attaching themselves to the label, even if they are considered dissident. Like, I see that there's no excuse for that at all. And I think that they're kind of like lending credence to this idea that it was a movement that started off good and then somehow went off the rails, even though that's complete bullshit. And these women have absolutely no excuse for maintaining otherwise. These are fucking professors. These are extremely educated, extremely intelligent women who really don't have an excuse for maintaining the positions that they do. So, and there's a million people who have been like begging for Christina Hoff Sommers and Karen Strawn to have a debate about the history of feminism. I'd love to see that. I'd fucking love to see that. It's a debate that Karen's not supposed to win, but she has all the facts on her side, and she absolutely would destroy Christina Hoff Sommers in that debate. And I think she knows it. I think Dr. Sommers knows it, which is why, I don't know, I'm kind of on team Paul Elam, like way back when he called her out. Because she talks about all these men's issues and all these issues affecting boys, but like, how do you fail to perceive the fact that this movement that you're attached to completely was negligent? And there's a series of arguments that are made within the manosphere regarding deliberate cover-ups of men's issues, particularly when it comes to the research of Dr. Mary Koss, right, where she knew that had she asked the same questions of both men and women and then counted men forced to penetrate women as rape, that she would have found gender parity in rape. And then the other issue has to do with Erin Pitsey and the founding of her domestic violence shelter, and how it was basically co-opted by feminists who realize that if they can make it a gendered issue, then they can get all the money. But even if you bar all that, even if you just throw all that out as though it was just conspiratorial nonsense and just give that zero weight, you still have the fact that these people claimed that they were pursuing gender issues and failed fucking miserably. That when they say women were oppressed relative to men, this was a comparative claim where they completely failed to analyze the male experience. So the reason I identify as a radical MRA is because I believe that the men's rights movement has been trying to play nice with the women's movement for decades and hasn't had much success at it. The most success we've seen has been with the more radical rhetoric. And in my own experience, what I found is that the more radical my rhetoric gets, the more I realize when people try to refute me and try to say that I'm wrong, they just prove me right. Because I've never seen good counter arguments. I actually present these arguments very often in ways that should be easy to debunk. Like I present them in ways that really are not steel-manned, and then what I find is that nobody has anything to offer. And then I realize when I look further into it that really I just misguided it because the Overton window is that fucked, and we need to keep moving. We need to keep going. So I don't really know how far this goes. I honestly don't. I've just found that the more radical positions tend to be more honest and more correct. One thing that the non-radical MRAs will often say that I think is extremely dishonest is they say, it's not like we're trying to take anything away from women. Have you seen the women's movement? Have you seen it? Have you seen the kind of shit they're trying to get up to? Have you seen the fucking shit they're trying to pull with fucking the Salem bitch trials, aka Pound Me Too? Have you fucking seen this Christine Blasey Ford shit? Have you seen this? Like, of course we're trying to take shit away from women. Like, they took way more than they should have. Women do not have equal rights. They have supreme rights. They have enacted female supremacy in law. Of course we're trying to fucking take things away from them. Are you fucking retarded? And I think that's so dishonest to try to just be like, oh no, we're not trying to take anything. We just want to take all of that extra fucking bullshit that women aren't entitled to and then clone all that and then give all that to men and then just like cross our fingers that society doesn't fucking collapse. Like, no. We all fucking know that's bullshit. Everybody knows that that's bullshit. I don't know. Typically people only bring that up in regards to domestic violence, but frankly, it seems to me that a lot of that funding is just squandered and it's all just bullshit. So like, I don't fucking know. I don't fucking know. But the other thing too is that there's a series of positions that I hold, and I hold those positions in good faith because I genuinely believe them, and I'm sympathetic to people who say like, you know what, I'm trying to lure flies with honey and not vinegar. I'm trying to reach that silent majority, and if you look like an unhinged fucking crazy person, people won't listen to you. I totally respect that position. I totally get that. That's why we need a category of radical MRA. Because I want you to be able to say, oh, he's one of the radical ones. He self-identifies as a radical MRA. Because frankly, there's room for both strategies. I think there's room for both strategies, and that creating that distinction allows for people to say whatever they want to fucking say, and for it to be properly categorized. And I think the existence of a radical MRA, hopefully, maybe having more useful categories will lead people to starting to recognize the other ones and to start to make sense of it. I don't know, maybe that's optimistic, but you know, you can bring a horse to water. That's all you can really fucking do. But the point is that it's not a category for a category's sake. It's that there's a legitimate need here. Some examples of my radical positions. The most obvious one, this was the one on the very first Gaytriarchy podcast, right? And my position regarding circumcision is that not only does it need to be made illegal, but all of the perpetrators need to be rounded up and put into a death camp and executed. And I think the manner of execution should be by repeated genital cutting. They should have their genitals cut continuously over and over and over again until they bleed to death. I think that's my legitimate position, because they've likely perpetrated that much pain and suffering upon others. And this is a case where it's all clearly documented. There's a fucking money trail or paper trail. You know, these are the kinds of cases where it's pretty open and shut regarding death penalty. The chances of falsely accusing someone of this and then them getting horrifically murdered when like they were innocent is basically zero. And it sends a message. It sends a message saying, hey, for the first time in human history, we're going to actually see men and boys as human beings. Human beings who are not just disposable objects, but people capable of suffering and you're not going to fucking treat people like that. You know, and I think that's totally reasonable. I think that people have all kinds, like, people will say that kind of shit about pedophiles. They'll say that kind of shit about mass murderers. They'll say that kind of shit about someone like fucking Hitler or whatever. Like, people will say that shit about all kinds of people, you know? And, like, I say, why not extend that conversation to a bunch of baby raping monsters? People who are professional baby rapists. People who became doctors, meaning they have the mental aptitude and the willpower to do virtually anything, and they just willingly choose to rape babies all the time for money with knives. So yeah, fuck that noise. And like, the other thing too is that when you take that extreme sort of a stance in regards to an issue, you let people know you're not fucking around, right? When you try to approach these types of issues in a really, really soft and calm way, people don't believe that you take it seriously. They don't believe that it's something you're passionate about. They don't believe that it's something that needs to be solved. They don't believe it's a real problem. Instead, you're presenting it as something where it's a matter of opinion. It's something where, you know, you can just kind of, you know, it's like your fucking hair color. You just fucking change it or not or whatever. Like, it's a suggestion. I don't think it should be a fucking suggestion. I think those people should live in fear. Like, I would endorse a serial killer just like going vigilante and fucking killing those motherfuckers. Why? Why would I care about them? Like, why would I not prefer that a person like that dies? Particularly unrepentant ones. You know, so that's one example. And like, that's an honest position I have. Sorry. Like, I could lie and pretend that's not my position. The other one is that female victims of sexual violence are privileged among victims of sexual violence. And when people say that we don't take violence against women or sexual violence against women seriously enough, those people are assholes. And you should call them assholes. You should say, you are an asshole for saying that. And this is something that sounds really shocking to people on its like face when, you know, it's first thrown out there, but it actually makes perfect fucking sense. Because what people fail to realize, particularly women, because their issues are always prioritized, is that when it comes to men's and women's issues and gender issues and really just human rights issues in general, it's a zero-sum game. It absolutely is. There's 24 hours in a day. There's a limited amount of resources in terms of finances, in terms of people's fucking time, in terms of just their emotional capacity to care about shit. Everything is limited. We are, in fact, working on limited resources. And when you say, oh, well, why can't we just care about everything? Why does it have to be a zero-sum game? It has to be a zero-sum game because we live in fucking reality. Because there's a limited number of problems, and we have to prioritize them. This is why priority is a concept. And when you have this narrative that says that, oh no, fuck you for bringing priority into the conversation, all that's doing is that it's saying, fuck the people who should have a higher priority in their issues, but are just given the shaft instead, which in this case is men and boys. It's just a way of saying, fuck them. It's a way of continuing to ignore their problems, because that was the great sin of the gender equality movement, was their failure to have proper priorities. Because instead what they did was they promoted a bunch of bullshit narratives in order to say that women's issues should always be the highest priority, because they were playing upon our fundamental ingrained gynocentric psychology. And people were basically just indulging in what was emotionally convenient to them without fucking thinking, without actually objectively looking at what's going on here. So that's my position, is that we put the maximum amount of resources and care and concern towards women's issues that we really can reasonably expect as a society. And we do this to such a degree that we've completely neglected male victims of sexual violence. Male victims, there's actually more victims of sexual violence who are male than female. You know, there's 3 rape cultures in the United States, and none of them have anything to fucking do with women, unless it's women as perpetrators. The first one is male genital mutilation, the second one is prison rape, and the third one is men forced to penetrate women. And whenever we measure that third one, it looks like we're seeing gender parity. And then if you add the other two, like, there's absolutely no question, absolutely no competition. Sexual violence is a men's issue. And in the future, I believe that human beings are going to look at women of the past, and they're going to say, wow, what a bunch of solipsistic cunts. What a bunch of solipsistic fucking cunts that they promoted shit like Me Too, that they said, oh, what about the women? That they had Take Back the Night, that they had a Violence Against Women Act, when they are statistically the safest fucking people, the most privileged and protected people on the fucking planet. Now, I'm not going to say women are evil. There's a classic phrase, which is that women are the same temperature as society. And it has to do with this idea that their morality is more based socially than it is based on, like, abstract concepts like justice. So I think that women have never enjoyed the advantage of having a society that holds them morally accountable. And it's going to start with women. Everybody else has correctly identified this. It's going to start with a culture of women shaming women for not caring about men enough. And this is my white pill. It may be just the case that what we're going to end up with is a female morality that in practice is superior to what we've seen from women in the past, but could just be fake and phoned in because it's just contingent on social shaming and social pressure, right? But, you know, I do believe that with each new generation, like, you kind of, you can't just judge them based upon the past trends. You know, like, unprecedented things have happened before. But this is a little bit stronger than what I mentioned earlier in my Man Up Women video, which is the Hail Mary play, right? This idea that, like, maybe they'll prove us wrong, right? Without, like, a reason. Just, like, maybe the next generation of women, because of the social climate, will prove us wrong. It's actually conceivable that this could happen. Because with mainstream anti-feminism, you know, we're at least starting to see that this just completely solipsistic, self-centered focus on only women's issue is going out of fashion. We're at least seeing that much. But the question is whether or not within the Big Ten anti-feminism, if we're going to see enough people who are willing to push it not just through into men's issues, but into radical men's issues, where we actually say, look at what happened. You know, we have to hold people accountable. You know, this didn't happen on accident. People put themselves in charge of gender issues and they fucked it all up. We have to be able to call out evil. We have to be able to say, these people fucked up and this was wrong. Because if we don't do that, we're just going to repeat the same mistakes all over again. And that's why I just resent this narrative of everybody trying to be pink-pilled and everybody trying to just sugarcoat everything and be really kumbaya and lovey-dovey. It's been tried before. It's been tried. And it hasn't worked. Maybe now there's a new culture where it will work. You know, and that's why I believe there should be a multiplicity of approaches. And that's why my approach is like this semi-casual approach, because I love this YouTube culture of people just sharing their views on the internet and sitting down and saying things. And I think that people are so fucking afraid to say things. And we need more people who are just willing to fucking put their neck out. Just fucking, like, shoot a video with your face and say what you fucking think. You know, because if you say something like that, you say it loud, you say it wrong, well, that's the fastest way to get corrected. You know, and that was where I found the confidence to just start speaking out. And then I found that people, when they do try to confront me, when they do try to refute what I say, they can't do it. All they do is just resort to ad hominem, or they just their arguments are fucking bad. I had a lawyer accuse me of just, like, faking my anti-feminism, like, as if I could just, like, play a character like that for, like, fucking, like, 5-6 fucking years or some shit, you know? Of course, from a lawyer's perspective, like, totally that seems like nothing to him, because, like, he's, like, a professional sophist and a professional liar, basically. So I don't, you know, so it makes perfect sense for the accusation coming from someone like him. But what we need to see is so when it comes to Ford, and to me she's just Ford, I don't think she's a doctor. Look at Janice Fomenko's video just fucking railing on Palo Alto. It's so fucking obvious that she's just like a product of this victimhood culture and a product of this just totally female-centered, just victim fucking promoting, fetishizing thing. And then for her to take on this role that she did, it's exactly what she wanted. It's exactly what she's always dreamed of. And you can tell it's rehearsed. You can tell it's fucking fake with her, like, bullshit Britney Spears voice and how she, like, deliberately, like croaks with her voice and doesn't try to clear it out. She's like always like this, like, she's clearly egging it on. Like, I did mock trial, which means I'm an expert in people who are bad fucking actors. Like, a specific type of lying where you have, like, a rehearsed thing that you're doing and coaching. You know, I know what bad witnesses look like. I've been bad witnesses. It's like, it's really It's really easy to spot. And it's really clear to me when I'm watching her, I'm just like, this is a bad mock trial witness. That's what this looks like. Real people don't look like this. Real people don't act like this over these kinds of things. It's just not true. And what's really despicable about it is there is some validity to some of the things they say in her defense, which is that, oh, like if you're assaulted, you don't necessarily remember everything, and like trauma fucks with your memory, and eyewitness testimony is unreliable. Like all that shit's true. All that's just true. You know, there's issues and stigmas with coming forward, blah, blah, all that's true. But when you pull all that shit out of the fucking of your fucking toolbox in regards to every single victim all the fucking time, particularly when there's one who's so fucking obviously lying and contradicting herself and changing her story whenever it gets close to a fact that could be verifiable against her, whenever this happens, you're just discounting all of those aspects. You can't just fucking cry wolf and use your entire toolkit of here's why you need to listen and believe every single fucking time. You know, and really what it does is it comes back to this practice of feminist rape farming, where what they've essentially done is they've tried to increase the number of rapes by redefining things in such a way that they actually coach people into believing that what they've experienced was some horrific sexual assault when there was no need for them to perceive it that way, when really they wouldn't have perceived it that way on their own. They probably would have had a better job or done a better job of adjusting to it and moving on and actually healing from their life. But instead, they get turned into these like victim fucking things, right? And like I've had this all the time in debates where like women who've experienced something, right, or they have like their Me Too story or whatever, that they have their rape story, whatever it is, They keep it as like a card in their back pocket, right? And they try to like pull it out where it's like how dare you say I don't care about gender issues? I was raped, right? And it's like some fucking like magical anime girl Sailor Moon bullshit where they just like do a twirl around and then they think they're gonna fucking turn into Sailor Moon and like use these fucking powers against me, and it's like I just throw it back in their face. I say fuck you. I don't think you were raped. I think you were given a lobotomy because you're fucking retarded for thinking that's relevant, you know? Because this is the thing. I've had people tell me, oh, you know, you'd be more persuasive if you spoke about issues that affect you personally and made your own victimhood central to it. You know, and these are from the same people who in that same conversation would turn around and then try to say, oh, well, like you're just bitter because you experienced this, right? Or they use it to attack you also. So, you know, it's totally disingenuous. The reason I don't argue in that way is because I'm talking about facts. I'm talking about generalities, right? We're talking about overarching fucking issues. And if you make it all about yourself and your own anecdote, it's just that. It's an anecdote, you know? You throw out an anecdote, I can go find an anecdote too. We can just play that game all day, and then eventually we're going to concede, okay, I guess we have to look at the general trends. So why even go there? Why even have that as a step? I would maintain that like if you've been a victim of like a horrific rape, it probably makes you less qualified to discuss that topic because it makes you less objective. It makes you more emotional, you know, and it's just this like fetishized fucking victim porny, just grotesque style of speaking. And what it is this idea of like, oh, well, I've been raped, so therefore I have this intellectual privilege. No, you fucking don't. No, you don't. You don't have privilege in that way. You don't have this epistemic fucking superpower to say that you're automatically right because you got like raped or whatever. Fuck you. Like, no, that's not how that works. You need to actually learn about the issues. And that's what I'm seeing is that like a lot of these people, because they're the victim, they use it as an excuse of just shutting down, right? They just take whatever their emotionally convenient thing is, and then they just go with it. And they actually don't have any knowledge of the issues at all. You know, like I had a woman, you know, when I mentioned to her, like, you know, men are more often victims of sexual violence than women are. Women are actually privileged among victims of sexual violence because if it's even illegal and you're able to go and report it and have it taken seriously in the moment that it happens, not all sexual assault victims and rape victims have that privilege. And when you say that's not good enough, what you're saying is that this special advantage that you have, it's not good enough, right? But you're completely fucking silent in regards to the fact that there's all these other forms of sexual violence that are still considered legal that still go on, and that people get shamed if they bring that up at all, that there's a stigma against talking about it at all, you know, and then this whole idea of underreporting too, right? You know, however underreported you think that sexual violence against women is, do you honestly think that men are more likely to report? You know, I think that's completely disingenuous. Anybody who would deny that fact, like, obviously there's more stigma for men coming forward. They understand that they don't have the resources, they don't have the support, they're less likely to be taken seriously, and there's a good chance that their rapist is just gonna flip it on them and just say, no, he raped me. You know, and who are people gonna believe? It's just like with domestic violence, who are people gonna believe? They always try to get the man to leave the house, they always try to get the man to be in a disadvantaged position. You know, the female domestic violence abuser gets to use the state as one of her weapons. The male domestic violence abuser doesn't get to do that shit. Abso-fucking-lutely not. So when it comes to underreporting, if you're going to cite that as an issue, I'd maintain that there's probably a much larger group of men who are silent about the issues. And it partly has to do with the social stigma, it partly has to do with the lack of legal resources, but it also has to do with the fact that men just deal with things in that way. You know, and the idea that they're going to have the exact same solutions that women are going to have is fucking retarded. Like, obviously it's not going to be the same. But the point is that in terms of prevalence and in terms of, you know, what's really a problem, what needs to be prioritized, I don't think it's at all controversial to say that men are the ones who, that basically sexual violence is a men's issue predominantly. So that's one of my radical positions, is that female victims of rape and sexual assault are privileged generally among rape victims and sexual assault victims. And the other thing too is that you know, what we're seeing with the weaponization of false accusations is that anti-feminism went more or less mainstream, and feminism is continuing to jump the shark. And what we saw, because it was affecting a Supreme Court nomination, you know, because they were using a false accusation of sexual misconduct to fucking cockblock a Supreme Court nomination, it forced these conversations out of this like fringe like gender war narrative into the mainstream. Now everybody's talking about it, and this is the moment. You know, this is when we need people to put their foot down and say, you know, enough's enough. Like, and I'm gonna take the stance that, you know, it's not just about preventing false rape allegations, right? It's about holding people who make those allegations responsible. And when people support those narratives, they need to be held responsible. This isn't just the manosphere and the men's rights movement and anti-feminism. They can't just be on the defensive forever. You know, look, I think that we're sitting on a winning hand and we just need to play the fucking cards. Just play the fucking cards. Just fucking bowl them in the dome. Just fucking, it needs to be more aggro. Absolutely. Because if you think about it, you know, the manosphere is always painted as lunatic and fringe and weird and whatever, no matter what. They'll do it with or without evidence. So if we're going to pay the price of being slandered as a bunch of unhinged radical people, why not at least have the advantage of throwing that radical perspective up there? All right, thank you for listening. You guys have a good day.
For long skin. Gone with the morning, fall to the horizon like caves. Gone with the morning, never shed your scars upon the skin.